COVID-19 vaccines from Pfizer and Moderna were rolled out at the end of last year, and more vaccines are on the way. There's been a great deal of uncertainty and confusion about the safety of those vaccines and were they manufactured and tested ethically. And what should Catholics keep in mind when considering which vaccine to take? Here to separate fact from fiction is the Director of Education at the National Catholic Bioethics Center, Father Tad Pacholczyk. Father, Happy New Year. Thanks for being with us. The Pfizer and Moderna vaccines both used cell lines during laboratory testing derived from an abortion, but neither used the abortion-derived cell lines in the actual production of the vaccine. Is that morally acceptable, then, for Catholics to take them?
Well, you see, Raymond, you're right in making that distinction because I think a lot of people say to themselves, if I'm going to get the jab in the arm and what I get put inside me had some contact with these cells, that seems worse than if they were involved in just some lateral, side testing that occurred. Mm-hmm. So that distinction is something that has been discussed quite a bit in the wake of the development of all of these vaccines. And the Church in general is saying to people, when there is this association with cell lines from abortion, if you have access to a vaccine that is more distantly connected or not connected at all, that obviously would be a preferable choice to, for example, a vaccine that's actually manufactured using these cell lines. So we want to keep some distance from this to the extent that that's possible. But in some cases, it may not be possible. And what the Vatican has said recently is, in the face of a proportionate reason, you can receive these vaccines even if they were produced in that manner by relying on these cell lines from abortions.
Yeah, and both Pope Benedict and Pope Francis have received the vaccine this week. Why would a pharmaceutical company use an abortion-derived cell line to develop a vaccine? Just curious.
The reason is, believe it or not, simple utility. In other words, these cell lines, they have become distributed everywhere. They're ubiquitous. Researchers at universities use them. Big Pharma uses them. Everybody's just kind of gotten used to it. And that's a shame. This is really, I think this COVID-19 pandemic offers us an opportunity to push back against that. More and more people are realizing, oh, there's a connection to abortion. I had no clue. And this is what, at the center, at the National Catholic Bioethics Center, we're encouraging people, write letters to the manufacturer of these vaccines, push back in other ways, make it clear that this is something that is an affront to conscience. We shouldn't be having science rely upon cell lines that came from direct abortions, even if it's true, which it is, that those abortions happened in the last century. There are only 2 cell lines that are used for vaccine productions, and those abortions happened in 1972 and in 1985. So that's a long time ago, but nonetheless, it's still not fair to all of us as end users to rely on those cell lines.
Now, there were about 15 companies making this COVID-19 vaccine, which is why it's hard to track them, of which 6 of those are using aborted-derived cell lines in the development and production of the vaccine itself. Now, I have a chart here I want the audience to see. Can a Catholic or anyone who's not interested in receiving a vaccine that's been produced with these abortion-derived cells, can they request a vaccine from a company or a different company based on their religious beliefs? And who should they go with? What's the safe vaccine? What's the vaccine you're recommending here?
Well, at this point, Raymond, we don't actually have that many choices. So I think that's going to change in coming months. We're going to have more and more coming into the market. And, each country is going to be a little bit different. So, for example, in Brazil, you will have access to a Chinese-manufactured COVID vaccine. That vaccine is not available in the U.S. So what people should do is check the availability first of, what are their options. And there's going to have to be an assessment for each individual about, how much risk am I at? And certainly for the elderly population, they are at higher risk. The statistics indicate that quite clearly and definitively, and they are good candidates to be first in line to get this vaccine. So they should talk with their doctors, find out, what is available, and if they have some choices, then they should check and consult, for example, with the chart that you mentioned, and choose the one that has the least association. But if they don't have a choice, and sometimes there's another issue here, Raymond, which is that not all these vaccines have the same efficacy. We've seen numbers above 90% for the Moderna, and meanwhile for AstraZeneca, it appears it's more in the range of 60, maybe 70%. So that can affect the decision by an individual if they're saying, I only want to get vaccinated once and I want to be sure it has the best chance of working. Then that will be part of weighing those proportionate reasons for getting vaccinated with a particular manufacturer's vaccine.
Pope Francis received his first dose, as I mentioned earlier, of the COVID vaccine this week. In an interview with Italian media on Sunday, he had this to say about people taking the vaccine. He said, I believe that ethically everyone should be vaccinated because you are playing with your health life and also with the lives of others. I don't know why someone is saying no, that the vaccine is dangerous. But if the doctors are introducing it as something that will work and that doesn't have special dangers, why not take it? There is a suicidal negativism that I'm not able to explain, but today the vaccine needs to be taken. Father Tad, that sounds an awful lot like a mandate from the Pope.
Yeah, maybe on a first glance, but I think what he's really saying is if the risks here are low and it appears to be safe as confirmed by extensive testing, this affords a very helpful benefit to public health. And it means that all of us should look at this closely. And, he's also mentioning the kind of suicidal negativity, I think was the phrase you mentioned, that sometimes people have a kind of generalized fear or hesitation around vaccines without carefully scrutinizing the incredible advantages and blessings, really, that they have brought to all of our health, to public health generally.
Father Tad, have you seen any data on what these vaccines might do to our natural innate immune system and reaction and resistance to COVID itself? I mean, what does it do to these T-cell immune individuals, and what might that impact be? Do we know?
Well, I would say at this point, the early testing that has been done has been on fairly large groups, meaning tens of thousands of people. And thus far, there have not been significant contraindications, significant problems or side effects. Now, does that mean that there won't be in the future? That you can never say with certainty. So could this trigger some aberrant immune responses later in a few people? Yes, that is possible. In the past, there have been some vaccines that have been developed not for COVID, but for other things. And one or two of those had some complications. Like one of them, in maybe 1 out of 100,000 people, so super rare, caused narcolepsy, where people would suddenly fall asleep and lose control, kind of brain problems. But, that kind of thing at a rate of 1 to 100,000, it's pretty uncommon, and it makes a lot of sense with a good safety profile otherwise to still look seriously at that possibility of getting vaccinated.
Across the country, more than 9.3 million vaccine doses have been administered out of a total of 27.6 million that were distributed. Now, the Trump administration on Tuesday announced several big changes to its COVID-19 distribution strategy. They're calling on states to expand immediately the pool of people eligible to receive these vaccines to those 65 and older, and those with underlying health conditions. The second change is that vaccine doses originally given to states based on their total adult population, starting in the next 2 weeks, will now be distributed based on the number of people who are over 65 years of age. Now, the goal is to have 1 million people vaccinated in the U.S. per week. Is that a reasonable goal, Father, for vaccine distribution?
That's a hard question. I think that's a logistical type question. And I think part of the idea here is that we don't want to see vaccine samples going to waste? And there are some challenges here in the sense that some of these vaccines require a double dose. And you and I both know it can be hard enough to get people to show up for the first dose, much less the second dose. And so you don't want to have a situation where you're sort of holding in reserve that second dose and then people don't show up and then, you don't utilize them and have to throw them away because some of them do degrade with time. So it makes sense here to try to accelerate this as much as possible. I mean, the specific number you cite really will depend on, are we going to go to the local drugstores and use them as outlets? Are we going to be setting up large venues in which people can easily get access? How difficult is it going to be, for example, if people have to go to a website and sign up all kinds of information ahead of time and the website is crashing and maybe they're elderly on top of it and they don't even know how to use computers? That's going to, push people away from getting vaccinated rapidly. So it's a logistical question, and it makes sense to reduce unnecessary barriers.
Well, now this week Disneyland, you saw, was turned into a COVID vaccine distribution center. So I guess they're going to use these big venues that are basically empty now to move people through. That seems to me a smart strategy. Moving to a different topic, Father, before we go, Pope Francis made some news this week. He issued a motu proprio on Monday, modifying canon law regarding women's access to the ministries of lector and acolyte. In the document Spiritus Domini, the Pope changed church law so that women can formally be instituted as lay ministers of lector and acolyte, those ministries rather. The Pope modified the phrase in Canon 230 of the Code of Canon Law from laymen to lay persons. However, he stipulates the conferment of such a role does not entitle them to support or remuneration from the church. Father, you've served as a parish priest, pastor. What are your thoughts? I mean, we've seen women lectors for decades in the church. What does this really change?
Yeah, I'm not sure that it changes a lot. It seems, in one sense, that it is an effort to convey kind of goodwill towards the important contributions that women make in the church. But I think it does raise this kind of broader question that comes up every so often in the church, Raymond, and I'm sure you run into it a lot. Is it important for us to kind of laicize clergy, have clergy become administrators and handle kind of worldly things, and do the opposite, which is to clericalize the lay people and turn them into kind of pseudo-ministers? Is that really the appropriate role and direction here that the church should be moving? Or, perhaps when we're talking about the unique contributions of women, that here we identify that they do indeed have some very particular gifts that benefit the whole church, and promote those, in other ways, apart from specific kinds of ministerial designations like this, which may be even potentially on the superficial side. We'll
leave it there. Father Tad, thank you for your commentary, and you can learn more about those ethical profiles of the COVID vaccines on the National Catholic Bioethics Center website, ncbcenter.org. I'll also tweet out that chart we had earlier. Thank you so much, Father Tad.
Thank you so much. Great to be with you, Raymond. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you.